And we could also go for the Appaloosa negate, which would then be 8 interruptions. Hello and welcome to the video, and today I want to talk about some Fiendsmith Tearlaments combos in Master Duel. I already made a combo guide for the TCG in the past, but the combos are a little bit different, because in TCG we had Necroco Princess, and then we got level 4 Lacrima, but without level 4 Lacrima and without Necroco Princess, the combos in Master Duel are different. But even without those cards, the Fiendsmith engine is still extremely broken and busted, so let's look into the combos what we can do with one Engraver and some Tearlaments cards. And here we have the Engraver 1-card combo. So we start with Engraver, and then we add a Tract, and then Tract, add Lurie, discard Lurie, and then Lurie mandatory effect, has to special summon itself, then we go into Requiem, then Requiem, summon Engraver from the deck, then we shuffle back the Requiem, and we go into Beatrice. And I think for Tearlaments it's a little bit beneficial if you shuffle back the Requiem because you want to mill your deck and you don't want to put back the Lurie because then you might mill the Lurie again. So by having one less card in the deck when performing the combo, your mills are going to be a little bit better. So Beatrice, send the Salik. If we had Pearl Rhino, then we could also send the Trivi Karma or Rainbow Bridge and then search the Pearl Rhino and then Pearl Rhino at Rhino Heart. But here we have to go for the Salik, so Salik at Rhino Heart. And now we have one card Kid Carlos just with one Engraver and no other cards in the hand. So Rhino Heart, send Halfness. And now the lines can vary depending on the cards that we currently have in the hand. So let's just assume we have already one Sharon in the hand. Otherwise, without Extender, you could just send Tier Cache directly from the deck, mill 2 cards, and then Kid Carlos reborn the Tier Cache. So let's say we have Sharon in the hand, we mill 3 cards. Cool, we hit a Scream, but we have so many good mills, so we should expect to mill at least some decent mills. And then Carlos, Tier Cache, milling 8 cards. Now we get the Rhino Heart. Then we could add back the Halfness by milling the Meta Noise. And now do Garrus. And here I would recommend to go into Mare, because by doing this line we get 2 additional bodies instead of going Sharon, Rhino Heart, Redoer. Then we don't have 2 bodies that we can link off. And with the Fiendsmith engine, you should always look for lines that generate as many bodies as possible, and this would be one line that generates lots of bodies. So we use the Mare, send the Sharon. And by the way, yeah, we should assume that we don't mill Sharon already. So assuming we have one Sharon in the deck, we can just go Mare, send the Sharon, and then make Rukalos. And now we have 3 bodies. And with any 3 bodies, we can go into Moon of the Closed Heaven, and then with Moon in the Closed Heaven, we can go into Sequence. And now shuffle back. And then we could go into a free material Appaloosa, or we could also make Desiree by shuffling back the Engraver. So a couple of options here, either a free material Appaloosa, a Caesar, or a Desiree, depending on what you prefer. And we still have Trivi Karma to search the crime. So yeah, the endboard could be either this with a free material Appaloosa, or with Caesar, or Desiree. And by the way, we can also use the graveyard effect of Truck as an extender, which can banish itself to fusion summon any Fiendsmith fusion monster from the extra deck by using the fusion material from the hand or from our field. And this way we can go into Desiree, and then we can equip the sequence to the Desiree. And by going for the Truck to fusion summon, we have a little bit better follow-up, because when we have the Lacrima in the graveyard, we can just go Beatrice, send a tier name, and then use the Lacrima as fusion material for Dragos Tapelia. So Beatrice, send Sharon, and in this case we can go into Kaleido Heart first, and then Rukalos, send the Kaleido Heart. Kaleido Heart comes back, sends the Halfness, and then with the Halfness we can get it to Dragos Tapelia during the opponent's turn. So we have basically Rukalos Omni negate, Kaleido Heart spin, Dragos Tapelia negate, Desiree negate, and with just one Engraver and one Extender we get to Rukalos, Kaleido Heart spin, Dragos Tapelia negate, Desiree negate, and then we have Graveyard Shuffle, we have Crime, so 6 interruptions at a bare minimum, and then a 7th if the opponent outs the Desiree, we can send 1 card from the opponent's field to the graveyard. And we should still have 3 non-engined cards or 3 extenders in the hand. And we could also go for the Appaloosa negate, which would then be 8 interruptions. So lots of cool stuff that you can do with the Fiendsmith engine in Tearlaments. And now, combo number 2. Here we don't have any Fiendsmith engine yet, but I will show you how you can get into the Fiendsmith engine with your tier engine. So we start with the road at the Reino Heart, and then we want to normal summon the Sea Mare, and then use the Reino Heart in the hand as fusion material for Kit Carlos. And then Kit Carlos dump the Salik to search the tier cache, not foolishing the tier cache directly. Really important because we want to get with the Kit Carlos into Fiendsmith engine. And by going for this line we get one additional body because we can go into tier cache. And I would recommend to not use the tier cache mill effector first, because we want to get into Moon of the Closed Heaven and into Requiem first before we start to mill our deck, and then the chances of hitting the Tearlaments cards increase. So after we go Moon of the Closed Heaven into Requiem, we go Kit Carlos revive tier cache, and then Kit Carlos chaining 1, tier cache chaining 2, Requiem chaining 3. So we get the Engraver out of our deck, and then we mill 8 cards, and at this point we should expect to hit something, for example a Shuffler or a Trevi Karma, and now we can extend however we want. So for example Grief into Reino Heart, because we did not use the Reino Heart effective foolish yet. So Reino Heart, tier cache, set the Sharon, mill 2 cards, here we hit a Scream, so we get to search a trap. And then make Rukalos, and then we can go into Sequence, and then Sequence, shuffle back, make Lacrima, and then we can go into Beatrice, and then we can send a Shuffler or Fairy Tale Snow depending on the cards that we currently have in the deck. And the card that you are supposed to send with Beatrice really depends on the cards that you milled. So for example here we could go into Appaloosa by using the Fairy Tale Snow and one Engraver from the graveyard as link material. So Fairy Tale Snow, banish 7, and then Engraver, shuffle back the other Engraver, and then we can make a free material Appaloosa, and we have the Meta Noise to protect the Appaloosa against bigger monsters from the opponent, and we have also droplets, talents, yeah, so this endboard is absolutely cracked, and we did not open Fiendsmith engine, we got into the Fiendsmith engine by using the bodies that we get from our Tearlaments engine. So keep that in mind, if you really want to get into Fiendsmith engine, you should think about the lines that produce as many bodies as possible. And one line would be sending Salik to search the tier cache, special summon tier cache, use the tier cache as a link material, and after that you tag out Kit Carlos into tier cache. And while trying to access the Fiendsmith engine we play into Nip, but Nip is not a real problem because as long as Kit Carlos remains on the field, the Nip actually triggers the Kit Carlos mill 5, so Nip doesn't really hurt us that much. Alright, now let's look into the third combo. And here we have Reino Heart and Engraver and Scream. And I want to show you how I would play out this hand. So we have to keep potential hand traps from the opponent in mind. And for this reason I would start with Reino Heart Scream. So Scream chaining 1, Reino Heart chaining 2. If the opponent wants to ash the Reino Heart, then it's completely fine. So we could mill into Havnis, and then the Havnis mill invalidates the ash blossom from the opponent. So assuming the opponent doesn't drop a hand trap here, and decides to, for example, implement a Kit Carlos, which is always the correct play, then we can still extend. And I want to show you a really cool line. So we go Engraver into Tract, and then Tract into Lurie. And then Lurie into Requiem, and then Requiem and Engraver. And now we can equip the Requiem, and then Requiem can send the Kit Carlos. And even though we got hit with Veiler or Imperm on Kit Carlos, we can just use the Engraver on field effect to send the Requiem, send the Kit Carlos, and now we get 5 mills. 5 mills. And that is pretty nice. And then after we send our own Kit Carlos, we can just go into Beatrice, set up a Rukalos or Shufflers or Fairy Tale Snow during the opponent's turn. So a couple of decent options from here. So for example Rukalos first. And then we have Havnis, Salik, Rukalos, Shuffler. Yeah, a bunch of interruptions, true hand traps on the Kit Carlos. And for the fourth combo, I want to showcase you a line involving Tract over Engraver, because currently Tract is not a one card combo by itself, but in combination with any body, Tract is installed with Extender. So let's say we start with Reino Heart and get hit with Ash plus 1 Reino Heart. This is still perfectly fine because Tract can extend from here. So we go into Lurie and then Requiem and Engraver. And then we make Sequence, shuffle back Lurie, Requiem, make Lacrima. And the Lacrima revive Engraver. And then we just send Halfness, and then Halfness plus Reinhardt that is already in a graveyard equals Kid Carlos. And now we can just make a basic tier combo from here. And now I want to talk about some niche interactions and combos that you should know when you want to play this deck. So first of all, Tract doesn't have to discard Lyri. You can discard any card in your hand including bricks like Trivikama or Salik with the Tract and then get the graveyard effects. And then you can normal summon Lyri and get into Fiendsmith Engine from normal summoned Lyri. And I think most people just tunnel vision into Tract, adding Lyri, discarding Lyri, but that is not always the correct play. You can do so much more stuff with Tract than just adding Lyri, discarding the Lyri, especially in a deck like this. Now the second interaction I want to talk about is Dugaris and Lyri. So most people think Lyri in the hand is always a brick, but this is not the case. You can just go to Dugaris, draw 2 cards, discard the Lyri, and then Lyri special summons itself. And then we get into Requiem with the Dugaris discarding Lyri. Also, if you still play Super Polymerization, then you can just go Super Poly, discard Lyri, Lyri special summon itself, and we can go into Requiem. And the next interaction I want to mention is Fairy Tale Snow plus Lacrima. And Fairy Tale Snow has the effect to banish 7 cards for coaster special summon itself. And sometimes you don't have 7 good cards that you want to banish, but in that case you might banish your own Engraver. And then you can use the effect of Lacrima to special summon back your own Engraver from the banishment. And by doing that, you lose 1 important card less for the Fairy Tale Snow effect. And if you have Fairy Tale Snow plus the Struro, then you can always get into Fiendsmith Engine with those 2 buddies. And I think most of people just tunnel vision with the Struro as a synchro tuner. But no, the Struro doesn't have to be always a tuner for synchro summons. You can also use the Struro as extender for link summons. So for example here, we use the Struro on Snow, then we go into Moon, and then Moon into Requiem, and then Requiem, summon 1 Engraver from the deck. And then we just link the Engraver and anybody into Sequence, and then Sequence, shuffle back Moon, Engraver into Lacrima, and then summon Engraver from the banishment. Also, if you get hit by a bestial from the opponent, keep this interaction in mind. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it already, but Tract has a graveyard effect fusion summon, and this might come up if you mill Tract. So if you mill Tract, while you have Lyri in the hand, you can just go Engraver or Moon of the Closed Heaven. And then banish the Tract, fusion summon, using the monsters from your hand or field as material to go into Lacrima. And then Lacrima can also special summon Engraver either from the graveyard or from the banishment. And then you can go into Beatrice or whatever you want. And you might want to use the effect of Tract to fusion summon over the Sequence, because you can use the Sequence to go into Collider Heart. Yes, the Sequence doesn't have to summon always Fiendsmith fusion monsters, it can summon any Fiend fusion monster. So we shuffle back the Halfness, Reino Tract, and 1 Mare to go into Collider Heart. And then we can go Requiem on Engraver, and then Engraver, send the Requiem, send Collider Heart, and now Collider Heart comes back. We can send the Scream, search the Salik, and yeah, if you have this setup, you can always access Tearlaments Trapper by sending your own Collider Heart with the Engraver, which is a pretty useful interaction. And if you don't have Requiem in rotation, you can also go Sequence, so Sequence equipping itself to Engraver from the field, and then Engraver can send Collider Heart, and then Collider Heart comes back, sends a Scream, searches a Salik or whatever trap you need. And if you have any Light Fiend already in a graveyard, you could summon Discard, Outer Entity Nyala. And Discard has one pretty useful effect, which makes it a cheaper alternative to Time Thief Redoer. And the effect I'm talking about is, once per turn, where Discard has Exist material, you can target 1 monster in your graveyard, detach all material from this card, and if you do, attach that target to this card as material. And this card detaches for card effect. That means if we have Sharon as material under Nyala, then we can just detach a Sharon and then get Sharon effect to fusion summon. And then this card becomes a Light Fiend and we can use this card to access the Requiem, while we have any Light Fiend in our graveyard. I'm not sure if Nyala over Redoer is correct, but you should know the purpose of this card. And the purpose is to become a Light Fiend and then go into Requiem with any 2 level 4s, while also being able to attach the Sharon to fusion summon with Sharon. And now I want to showcase you some combos with this deck in Master Duel. And now let's look into some replays with Fiendsmith Tearlaments against the meta decks. And here we are in the first game against Tenpai Dragon. And we know that it's Tenpai Dragon because the opponent chose to go second. So we start with the Sea Mare, dumping the Hafnis, and then Hafnis plus Rhino Heart from the hand make it Carlos. And it's really important that you use the Rhino Heart from the hand to keep as many bodies on the board as possible. So Kid Carlos resolves. And here I think I made a small misplay. I think I should have added Tirkish to the hand instead. Or Kid Carlos, dump Salik, Salik a Tirkish to the hand, so I have one Tirkut in a graveyard that I could bench for the Tirkish. Anyways, we go Rota into Rhino Heart, and then Tract into Lurie, and the Lurie into Requiem. And then with the Requiem on the board, Kid Carlos into Tirkish. And then in a new chain, Kid Carlos chaining 1, Tirkish chaining 2, Requiem chaining 3. Taking out to deck Finn before we commit to the mill 8. And I think I could have committed to Kid Carlos, summon Rhino Heart from the head instead. And then I would still have a Tirkish in my hand. Yeah, I think adding the Tirkish to the hand directly would be the best play, because I can still mill into a Kash card or a Tier card and then summon Tirkish from the hand later. And then I would have a guaranteed line into Rukalos. And I still get into Baron de Fleur with the Tirkish and the level 4. And now I go into Lacrima. The idea is to have one fusion in a graveyard that I could use for Dragon's Tapelia during the opponent's turn. And now with both of them we go into Beatrice, and then Beatrice, send the 3v Comer bench itself, add the Scream. And I think it's really important that you always add Scream instead of adding a trap, because we have Baron de Fleur access with Strudo in the graveyard. So this Strudo here, and then we make Baron de Fleur. And then we get the mill 3. No, I think we got the mill 3 already with the Fairy Tale Snow summon. And now Baron can pop the Scream, and now Scream can search a trap. Then we go SP Little Knight pass. And I think here is where you can see the misplay of not adding Tirkish to the hand with Kid Carlos. Because if I went for Kid Carlos to add Tirkish, then I could summon the Rhino Heart from my hand. And then with the Rhino Heart summoned from the hand, I get into Rukalos, I get into Baron de Fleur, I still get into Beatrice with both Engravers, and then after I detach one Engraver, I have Engraver again in the graveyard, so I could go for sequence to summon Desiree. And I think Rukalos, Baron, Beatrice, Desiree, Salik is better than having the SP over the Desiree. And now I get hit with Feather Duster. Sure, I just add with the Salik. So Salik, searching the Rhino Heart for follow up. And now Lightning Storm, and here is where I have to negate it with Baron de Fleur, otherwise Lightning Storm is just going to wipe out the Baron de Fleur. And now my opponent has 4 cards left. So let's see what opponent can do with 4 Tenpai engine cards. We start with the normal summon Doro. Here is where I chain Hafnis. So Hafnis hits 3 including 1 Sharon. And then my opponent gets to add Genroku. And here I had to make a choice between using Sharon and using Rukalos on the Genroku, and I decided to use Rukalos to negate and destroy the Genroku from my opponent. And by doing that I also get to send the Hafnis from my board. And now with the Hafnis I can make Kaleido Heart. But I do not use the Kaleido Heart effect yet. So first of all SP to banish the Door from my opponent's side, and now my opponent has to go Kaiman into Fadra and then summon Pydra. And now activating Sang Summoning, and here is where I go Beatrice, send an Aqua Monster, and now Kaleido Heart spin, and now my opponent is left with Fadra, Pydra, can't do anything except making Seals pass, but then I just win in the next turn. Yeah, and even with 2 board breakers and 4 Temper Engine cards, the opponent was completely unable to break through the board. Now Baron de Fleur can force out the seal, gets negated by Effect Veiler. Sure, but doesn't matter, because I have Fiendsmith follow-up with the Engraver in the graveyard. Yeah, my opponent gets sealed into Pydra, and then Pydra gets to set a Kaiman from the deck, but it doesn't matter at all because it's more than game on the board. Oh yeah, and I already resolved the Lacrima burn, so my opponent has less than 8000 life points left and we just win it. Yeah, and I think this is what the endboards of this deck could look like. And now let's look into another game. And here we went second against Yubel, but this opening hand looks quite playable for going second. So my opponent starts with Tract. Let's see what they can cook up with their own Fiendsmith engine. So it's got Lurie special summon itself. And then Requiem. And then Requiem and Engraver. And now it's time for opening of the Spirit Gates, Dark Awakening Beast, and then Dark Awakening Beast at Chaos Summoning Beast. So additional normal, and then we go into sequence, and then sequence, shuffle back, make Lacrima, Lacrima revive Engraver. And then with Lacrima and Engraver we go into Beatrice, and then Beatrice, attach, send Samsara the Lotus, Spirit Gates, discard the Dead Mulchami, summon Samsara the Lotus. And then we make a free material Appaloosa before committing into the Nightmare Pain, and now Nightmare Pain is protected against Ash and Ghost Ogre if we had any of those, but we already checked for Handtraps earlier. So Spirit, floating into Yubel, and then we add Gruesome Grave Skirmer, which can pop the Yubel, and then we summon Terror Incarnate. And now with those two, we go into Yama, Yama at Shavara, and then Grave Skirmer, summon back the Spirit of Yubel. And now we have Shavara to pop the Spirit. Now we get back the Yubel, and then Rage. Shavara sets the trap, and then we go into Phantom of Yubel. Alright, so pretty standard Yubel end board. Let's see if we can crack that. So we start with the Race Off. Race Off gets Ashed, which is perfectly fine, because now the opponent played into Talons. And now we can go Tract into Lurie, discard the Lurie, special summon itself. Let's see if the opponent wants to use Phantom. No, so we go into Requiem. And let's see if we can bait out the Phantom with the Requiem effect. So Requiem forces out the Phantom, and then we can just chain Appaloosa. And now the opponent is forced to use the last remaining interruption, the Rage. But no, the opponent has Imperm, which is also fine. That means our talents traded with the Appaloosa from the opponent and also Imperm as the non-engine. And the only remaining interruptions are Rage into SP and then SP banished twice. But we should be able to play through that. So here I get to draw with Maxi going second, which is quite nice. Even though the second Rhino Heart is currently nothing in hand, but I could get one additional draw if the opponent wants to commit into Rage, into SP. Oh, actually never mind, the Rhino Heart in the hand does something. It allows me to go into Kid Carlos while keeping one Rhino Heart on the board. And here my opponent goes into the Royal Rare Rage. So Rage, getting rid of Kid Carlos. Honestly, I think it was a misplay on my opponent's side. My opponent should have waited for the resolution of Kid Carlos, because now I can adapt my Kid Carlos search depending on the draw that I got from Maxi. So I search Sharon, discard the Fairy Tale Snow, mill 3 cards, and I milled into Meta Noise and Tear Cash. Perfect. So Rhino Heart chaining 1, and then summoning the Tear Cash from the hand as chaining 2. Now I get the Rhino Heart summoned, but I already used the effect of Foolish. And here I use the SP from my opponent's side to go into Underworld Goddess. And here I dump the Scream to search a Salik, and then 3V Karma, searching Scream, then activating Scream, and then Fairy Tale Snow, banish 7 cards, and then on resolution I get to trigger the Scream mill 3, and I hit Sharon. Perfect. Oh yeah, I also hit Grief, that means I get to add back my banish trap, so Sharon into Rukalos. But currently my opponent has still the Yama in the graveyard, and even though I have Underworld Goddess and Rukalos, my opponent could just chain block the Yubel effect with Yama as chaining 2, and then my opponent would float into Terror Incarnate and I have no longer lethal. So I need to go to Garrus, trying to dig into Engraver. I hit Engraver, now I can equip Engraver with the Engraver effect, send the Yubel, and the Sense card effect doesn't destroy the Yubel, and now I have lethal on board. I can just attack and it's game. So we broke the board and OTK'd Yubel going second. And finally, I want to showcase you my decklist and explain some deck building decisions that I made. I did some testing, but I didn't test super hard because I don't feel super motivated right now. I'm kinda dissatisfied with the current meta because going second against all of the other Fiendsmith decks is pretty rough. Which is also the reason why I have been procrastinating this video for a very long time. But now let's talk about the deck, and I think it's obviously to play 2 Sharon, 1 Havnis and 3 Rhino Heart. Those are your main engine cards, you obviously want to max out on them. And then we play 1 Mare as additional normal summon and also for the Aqua count. And I really like 4 Aqua monsters in Tearlaments. So you have a higher chance of making Kaleido Heart or Kid Kalos without having to put back your Rhino Heart all the time. So you could, for example, leave the Rhino Heart in your graveyard when you fusion summon with the sea Mare that you milled with your random mill 3, and that allows you to make it Carlos into Tearcash and then summon the Rhino Heart back from the graveyard. And in general, it's better for Kaleido Heart if you have more Aquas in the deck. And then we still play Road R for Rhino Heart, which is our main normal summon we always want to see, and then Foolish World Goods, which is another way to get into Rhino Heart by sending the Salik, or we could also send the Trivikama to search the Grief as Extender, or we could also send the Salik and then search either Sharon or Tearcash as Extender. And speaking about Tearcash, with the Fiendsmith cards I like to play a bigger cash engine with 2 Unicorn, 1 Birth, 1 Fenrir and 1 Race-Off. And Unicorn is pretty nice at punishing the opponent if the opponent doesn't shotgun their own Mulchami for Valos. And I think there are many opponents who might not want to shotgun the Mulchami for Valos immediately. They might want to wait for your Requiem effect and then chain a Mulchami for Valos in response to the Requiem effect is summoned from the deck. And then they still turn skip you, but they also get to draw 1 card with their Mulchami for Valos. And Unicorn is pretty nice in punishing this exact play, while Unicorn is also a pretty nice way to get into your own Fiendsmith engine. So Unicorn plus any hand trap, for example your own for Valos, is always a Moon of the Closed Heaven and then Requiem, and then you can just use the Birth to reborn your Unicorn, and then you have 2 bodies to go into sequence, into Lacrima, and then with Lacrima you can revive Engraver, and then you have Beatrice, and with Beatrice you have access to Tier Engine. While Birth itself can also punish the opponent for playing with their Fiendsmith engine, so if the opponent goes Engraver, Tract, discard Lurie, then on resolution, Lurie chaining 1, Birth chaining 2, banish Engraver, Lurie, Tract, and then the opponent lost 3 valuable cards. So in general, the Cash engine is pretty nice to get into our own Fiendsmith engine while punishing the opponent for dropping Mulchami for Valos or other hand traps. And then we play the 3 Scream, 1 Grief, 1 Heartbeat, and 1 of each tier trap, because Salik the best trap is still limited, so we have to play the other cards as endboard pieces that we can search with the Scream. And for the extra deck, you still play 1 of each tier fusion and then the Drago's Pelia, which you can make by shuffling back the Lacrima from the Fiendsmith engine. I also like to play Desiree as Omni Negate in addition to Baron de Fleur. And obviously Baron de Fleur in combination with the Strudo, because the Strudo is nice to draw and nice to mill. So we can always use the Strudo to get into Baron de Fleur, and Baron can also be an extender, popping our own Sharon to get into Root colors. I still like Rido over Niala, but I could change my mind on it in the future. And then Lugaris, Beatrice, and the Fiendsmith engine. And by the way, I think Apollousa is not necessary in this deck at all, because I think Apollousa is most of the times just win more. If you get it to a tier endboard going first, then you just win, you don't need Apollousa. Instead, I'd rather focus on going second exotic monsters, for example the Underworld Goddess, which can break the opponent's boards that include Link 2 monsters like Espelil Knight, which you saw in the previous replay against Yubel. And Underworld Goddess can get you into Requiem, and then with Requiem you can get into your own Fiendsmith engine. But you can play whatever you want. You can play Apollousa in an extra deck, or maybe X-Code Talker, or maybe some other stuff that I might miss in this extra deck. Yeah, so that should be it for the extra deck and for the non-engine. And for the non-engine, we still play 2 Maxi and Mulchami for Valos. I think those cards are absolutely broken right now. And Maxi became even more toxic with the Mulchami for Valos, because in the past, Maxi had only a 33% chance to be in the opponent's opening hand. But now with Maxi and Mulchami for Valos combined, the opponent has roughly a 50% chance to have at least one of them in the hand. And also those cards can draw into each other, which is such a toxic combination. So at this point you have to play Ash Blossom just to counter the opponent's Maxi and Mulchami for Valos. And in addition to Ash Blossom, I like Talents, because Talents can punish the opponent for dropping Mulchami for Valos against us. Then we can still make it Carlos Salik pass, and we get to see the opponent's hand, we can rip the best card. And in addition to that, the effect of Talents to take one of the opponent's monsters is pretty nice when you want to break boards going second. You could also play Called by the Grave, but the current problem with Called by the Grave is that you don't have enough deck space to fit in all the non-engine that you want. So you kinda need to play 2 Maxi and 3 Valos yourself and then counters against those cards in the main deck, and Tearlaments doesn't have a deck space to do all of that together in one deck list. Maybe you can cut some of the engine cards, for example one of the Shufflers, or Crime, Meta Noise, or Heartbeat. Then you get more deck space for non-engine, but then you decrease your ceiling when you mill the deck. Also, with so much Fiendsmith everywhere, I have seen more biases recently. And biases are also super rough against this deck, because they do not only interrupt your Fiendsmith engine, but they can also banish your tier names. And that is a huge problem for this deck. And with so many multi for Valos, Maxi and Bestials against your deck, my motivation to test this deck in the current format was not super high. Maybe you have a greater motivation right now to test this deck than I currently have. So I hope that this was educational and that you can make some improvements. Anyways, that's it for this video. See you in the next video. Have a nice day. Bye!